Welcome to Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. I'm your host and author, Ron Ovitt, and today we're at session 8, the last part on the brain sessions that we're doing, and today we're going to look a little bit at neurochemistry. You know, the reason we're doing this is not to become neuroscientists. We could really get technical, but that's not the purpose of this program. The purpose is really to let us know that if we can know how some of the parts are working, if we can know why things are happening, it gives us the ability to correct them. It gives us the ability to use the mind to change the brain. And that's important. That's what we want to do. And today we're talking about an important part of how the brain works, and that is the neurochemistry, specifically dopamine, when it comes to behavior. When it comes to triggers that upset us, dopamine is that chemical that says, I gotta have it, I gotta have it. And we want to talk about how can we work with that? How can we stop that onslaught of that dopamine rush? And so that's basically what we're going to do today. You know, there's the brain has neurotransmitters, right, that communicate throughout the body with the neuronal pathways. And they do this through chemical messengers. Neurotransmitters transmit these messages. And so there's over 50 active drugs that the body produces, and more than 100,000 chemical reactions go on the brain every second. So, I mean, it's just a tremendous, God has created us in a marvelous way. We're fearfully and wonderfully made, right? And so it sends these all throughout the body, and they do it through these neurotransmitters. And the ones that we want to look at are dopamine, and then serotonin and endorphins. We'll spend a little time on that. There's 22 amino acids that are the building blocks for these different neurotransmitters. And there's up to 100 different ones in our body. But like I said, we want to look at dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. Now, dopamine is that anticipatory chemical. It says, I gotta have it. It's the foot on the gas. It's the foot on the gas, if you will. It makes us excited. It affects the brain processes that control movement, emotional response, aids in the ability to experience pleasure. It's part of what helps us with habits, unfortunately, causes addictions. And so we see that it's the anticipation. Now, for a lot of many years, for many decades, they thought that, it was the pleasure molecule. In fact, I remember reading about that, seeing articles on it, videos. And that's because anticipation has that kind of pleasurable experience. When you anticipate something good, it's exciting. And it can almost be like that's the pleasure itself, but it's really opening. It's sort of like, man, I want some pizza, right? And you're excited, you ordered it, you're on your way to get it, you're carrying the box back, you can smell it, and then all of a sudden you eat it. But what's interesting is after about the second bite, you don't even hardly taste it anymore. You've already had that euphoric high, this is pizza, this is great. But wasn't the anticipation, certainly it was pleasurable, but it's really the endorphins that cause the pleasure. Dopamine is that I've got to have it. I've got to have it. And it's important. It's an important distinction. It's about desire. It's about wanting, not simply liking, okay? And so that's important to know. Dopamine is a chemical. A brain chemical allows us to have drive, motivation, concentration. It can be used for good, of course. And that's part of how we're going to talk about beating this dopamine rush is by replacing it with something that is just as desirable, but that's better for us. And so we use dopamine to fight dopamine, right? And so examples would be, for example, a child at a birthday party, right? Going to have a birthday party and they think, oh boy, my friends are coming, I'm going to get presents, and they're all excited, right? That dopamine says, oh man, I can't wait. They're looking, they see the presents over there and they can't wait to open the present. And then they open it and, oh wow, and they're all excited. But then that excitement drops and they see another present, gotta open that one, right? Or let's use a more adult example, right? You wake up in the morning and you think, oh man, I got to have what always works. What is that? Coffee and that maple frosted donut. And so you're hurrying up, you're getting rushed, you're waiting, to get into the car, and someone rings the phone, like, man, what's going on? I don't want to do this now. Why? Because you got to get to that donut shop, get that donut and that coffee, right? And that dopamine rush is saying, I got to have it, I got to have it. And so you get there finally, and there you're in line. You go, oh, it's taking so long. You get there finally, you get your stuff, and boy, before you're out of the parking lot, you already took one bite of that donut, and then you took one swig of that coffee, and the endorphins start to happen. And of course, there's caffeine and sugar and everything else, but then all of a sudden, you're going, and that second, third bite, you don't even taste it anymore hardly, and now you're going, okay? But it was that I've got to have it, you see, that really drove us there. Now, can you imagine if you got a call? It says, look, you got to come into work real quick. You can't stop anywhere. You got to go. It's an emergency. Well, now you got a decision to make. Dopamine is saying, boy, I got to have it. I got to have it. And that's where we need to learn delay of gratification, right? And that delay of gratification helps us to make that choice. Well, what's more important here? Well, I better delay it. I can go without it. I'll go ahead and get to work because it's an emergency. But that's not always easy. It's interesting that the same part of the brain, that nucleus accumbens, is the same part where it has a striatum where that dopamine comes from, but is also the center where we can learn to delay gratification. And unfortunately, today we live in a society that is so flushed with experiences, and I gotta have it experiences, and we get immediate gratification. I mean, it used to be you'd have to, I wonder what, that is, and you write a note, later on you'd look it up. No, not today. You can Google it. You can sit on your couch and ask Alexa, hey, and ask a question. You get immediate answers. Whether they're right or not, that's debatable, but it's that instant gratification. We pull into a drive-through line and get it now. We can get all kinds of things instantly. And we get rewards instantly on our phone when people like certain things. And when we get a text and they come back and now we're texting. The average young person spends 6 to 8 hours on their phone and gadgets, talking and texting and doing other things. Delay of gratification is something that we need to work on. So how do we combat this dopamine rush? How do we combat this rush? Well, first of all, we can do it by reassessing the reward. We need to ask ourselves, what is going on? What is going on? What's the reward? You see, there's intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. And a lot of times we need to do things because we're motivated internally, right? It's good. It's something we enjoy. That's the growth mindset that we talk about. They did a study at Stanford where they took children, kindergarten-age children that liked to draw. They were drawing all the time. Didn't have to motivate them. Didn't have to ask them. They come into class and they sit there and they start drawing. Well, they took those kids and they decided to start looking at their drawings and give them gold stars if they did certain kinds of drawings or at certain kinds of levels. And they started giving gold stars. And so the kids then were excited about getting the gold stars. And after a couple of weeks, they stopped giving them. Well, guess what? The kids stopped drawing. That intrinsic motivation was replaced by extrinsic motivation. And so when they didn't get the reward, the behavior stopped. And there's a key. That's a key for us, because if we can extinguish the reward, right? If we can extinguish the reward, the chances are we can extinguish the behavior. And so we need to ask ourselves, is what I'm doing as rewarding as it once was? Even take smoking, for example. There might have been, when you first started, a reason that satisfied you, a reward from smoking. It could have been, hey, looking cool, right? It could have been that you were nervous and it really did calm you down. It could be that you were lethargic and it did excite you. I've heard all kinds of reasons. But the fact is now, decades later, those reasons might not be as accurate. It might be that you're really reacting to the withdrawal that the looking cool and all that kind of stuff really isn't what's satisfying you anymore. And so we need to look at that and say, is the reward really worth it? Is it worth it? And so we reassess the reward, because if we can find out that the reward isn't, then we can stop, right? And so Anna Lepke, in her book, Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence, talks about this. She says that we're living in a world that's overstimulated by dopamine. Marketing, entertainment, social media have created an environment of instant gratification, competition, comparison, where we're always being triggered. And she suggests that we monitor what we're doing in order to get a better understanding. And so we need to ask ourselves, what am I doing? I mean, you may not be conscious that you're spending X amount of hours, on the computer, or on the phone, or getting instant gratification from things. You might say, where am I doing it? When am I doing it? Who am I doing it with? And then finally, when you can realize what you're doing, then you can say, why am I doing it? And the question is, can I replace it? That's the second thing. The first thing, if the reward isn't worth it, then we can stop. Second thing that we can do to combat it sometimes is by then going on a dopamine fast. Going on a dopamine fast. She suggests that in her books. She says you need to take 30 days to reset the brain. That's why a lot of treatment centers are 28, 30-day program, because it takes that long to reset the brain. And so we have to ask ourselves, is that reward really worth it at this point? For example, if sugar was wonderful, I really got to have it, I'm eating it, I like it, right? That donut tastes so good, but now you've gained 20 pounds. And so now you say to yourself, you're not fitting in your clothes, you gained the weight, and you said, gee, maybe the sugar at this point, the satisfaction from that taste isn't worth the weight that I've gained, and so therefore I need to stop, you see. And so by asking, why am I doing this? Well, it tasted good, but that's not worth the results, and so perhaps I need to stop. And so you can do a fast, and for 30 days you can say, okay, I'm going to stay off of sugar. I'm going to stop. And I've done that before. And you can do it. And you can do it with almost anything. And so a fast a lot of times really helps us reset it. The third thing that we can do, and you can combine these, is that you can replace it. You can replace it. Find something better. And so you fight dopamine with dopamine. And what do I mean by that? Well, here you have the sugar, okay? And I got to have it. I got to have it. But now you're saying, boy, the reward isn't quite worth it. I put on all this weight. I'm going to replace it with what? Exercise. I'm going to have daily exercise, and I'm going to eat other things that taste good but don't have the sugar factor, okay? And so you replace it, and now you're getting a reward. You're using dopamine. You're starting to feel the endorphin rush from exercise. You're starting to feel the clothes are feeling better. You're starting to like the way you look. Now you have another reward system competing with the sugar. And that dopamine now is saying, get up, got to go exercise. Get up, eat that healthy salad. And the dopamine now, you're using dopamine to fight dopamine. And it's really, really kind of exciting. And so as you're replacing it, you're using dopamine to fight against dopamine. Maybe that's what Paul meant when in Romans 12 he said, and brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he's done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice. This is truly the way to worship him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of the world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you'll learn to know God's will for you, what is good, pleasing, and perfect. And so you replace those things of the world, right, with the pleasure and the joy of getting to know God. And he uses those brain chemistries to help us spend time with the Lord, to do the kind of things that he wants us to do. And the reward is we'll get to know what God's will is for us, and we'll get the joy of the Lord as a replacement. Well, the second chemical is serotonin. And serotonin is really the brakes. If dopamine's the gas, serotonin's the brakes. And the role, it brings a calm, soothing, quiet, anti-impulsive well-being and satisfaction. It constrains dopamine's actions. And so normally that's how things should work. We desire some food. Dopamine says, I got to have it. Nothing wrong with that. We eat that meal and we feel fine. Serotonin then kicks in and says, boy, that was satisfying. I feel satisfied, okay? But when we have that addiction type problem, when we have that thing and dopamine is overtaking it, then sometimes what happens is that we don't get that serotonin satisfaction feeling. We don't get it. And so a lot of times what we need to do is that we need to seek help in acknowledging and working that maybe our drive is coming from an emotional need. Maybe there's some unmet things that are driving us. Maybe we need to do that fast to get away from the dopamine flush where we can compete and serotonin can return to its normal state of satisfaction. And then maybe we need to replace it where we find something else that is really satisfying. And so we need to adjust our serotonin system. And then the last one, of course, we're talking about is endorphins. And endorphins are, is that naturally created opiates in the brain. It's that good feeling that we have. And so, unfortunately, endorphin receptors on the sites lead to euphoria and relieve pain, and that's great, but we've learned how to abuse that system. Street drugs are more powerful than what our body produces, and they're self-administered, and addictions happens when we react to this euphoria with addicted pleasure-seeking behavior. And so endorphins increase significantly in response to alcohol, cocaine, amphetamines, and work in the nucleus accumbens. And so it's a key region that causes this addiction, these cravings. And so we need to have cravings. And what we have is this exciting system versus the satisfaction. And balance with the use of neurotransmitters results in satisfaction. We need a balance. An abuse only results in temporary excitement. In the book Porn Circuit, published by Covenant Eyes, they write, in his book, The Brain That Changes Itself, Dr. Deutsch explains that we have two separate pleasure systems in our brain, one for exciting pleasure and the other for satisfying pleasure. And I would say the one for leading us toward pleasure, right? Motivating us toward pleasure, that's the dopamine. The exciting system, the one that gets us to move, I gotta have it, is fueled by dopamine and anticipation. It's all about appetite, such as imagining your favorite meal. The satisfying system involves having a meal that provides a calming, fulfilling pleasure. This system releases opiate-like endorphins that provide feelings of peace and euphoria. Pornography, Deutsch writes, hyperactivates the appetite system, but the satisfying system is left starving for the real thing, which includes actual touching or kissing, caressing, and a connection not only with the body, but also the mind and the soul. The satisfying system releases oxytocin and endorphins and bellows the word of Marvin Gaye, ain't nothing like the real thing, baby. And that's where we need to be. We need to find that balance, don't we? We need to recognize when dopamine is out of control. And we can use dopamine, something else that satisfies, to fight dopamine. We can replace it, right? So here's some things you can do. Reduce stress. Let's look at the stress in our life. Let's start to look at the stress, learning to relax. Let's use some of the tools that we'll be learning in here with the emotional regulation, right? And we can start to do that. We need to start eating healthy, right? This is chemicals. We need to make sure that the brain is balanced well with good nutrition. The third is, of course, that dopamine fast. If you're finding you're out of control, then let's do the dopamine fast. You can do it. You can do it. You can start with day 1, then day 3, and then you can look more at it like a cleanse at that point, right? And you can do this. Fourth thing is to seek help with emotional issues. There could be emotional issues that are behind this, and that's why we talk about emotional relearning. A lot of times we're motivated by the negative things that we believe, that we know, really should know, aren't true. And so we need to overcome that. And so exercise is important. Here again, we're talking about the chemicals in the body, and exercise is a way that really can help the brain function the way it should. And sleep is so important. It's amazing how many people don't get the sleep that they should. And your body won't function the way it should. The brain won't function the way it should if it's not getting the nutrition, the exercise, the oxygen, right, and the sleep that it needs. And then lastly, embrace our relationship with God. He created us this way. He created us for himself. He's a relational God. And through that relationship, our brain gets reset. Our chemicals function better. We need fellowship. We need fellowship with God. We need that peace that passes our understanding. So we need to turn to him. So we're beginning to understand that our behavior is complex. That's why we spent time looking at the brain. Now we're going to talk about other things, right? Relationships, our childhood, attachments. And we're going to look at other parts of why we behave the way we do. But I thought it was important to see that God has created us with this incredible brain and this body and this soul, this spirit that all work together. And I want to open our mind to the fact that change is possible. It's about giving attention to what's going on in our minds. And if we stop and sense what's going on, that's emotional recognition, we'll catch when we're going into a negative state of mind, and we can regulate it, right? That's emotional regulation. And then we can be in the process of renewing our mind, letting God renewing our mind. And that's all through emotional relearning. Christ has come to give us an abundant life. He said, I have come to give you life and give it abundantly. The New Living Translation says, my purpose is to give you a rich and satisfying life. And the word that Jesus used was Zoe. And he referred to that word specifically. There were other words that he could have used, but he used that one. And it means this absolute fullness of life, both essential and ethical, which belongs to God and through him. It's life that's real and genuine, a life that's active and vigorous, devoted to God, lasting forever. Knowing Jesus and living for him is true satisfaction. So as we learn about how the brain works, let us realize that our bodies are the temple of God and that we need to take care of them. He's given us our physical life and our psychological life, and we need to allow God to guide us with this new spiritual life. What a marvelous plan. So I look forward to continuing now as we move into attachment theory, as we talk about our childhood and some of the beliefs we have. We're going to have some exciting days ahead. Thanks for joining us today on this Emotional Resilience Living with the Fruit of the Spirit class. Please share this video with others. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of the other exciting classes. You can also, for books and videos and podcasts, you can go to our website, ronovet.com, and find out more information.